And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Preston Dennett, renowned UFO researcher and author with over 30 books to his name. Today we'll be talking about Onboard UFO Encounters and his own personal OBEs. Preston, welcome back. It's great to have you again.
Yeah, always a pleasure and an honor. Thanks for having me.
Am I right about that? Over 30 books now?
Yeah, 32. And soon to be, 33, 34, and 30. I'm working on 3, actually.
At the same time.
I am.
What is it, a
sequel
series?
to Symmetry. Oh, yeah.
Well, that's great.
I did a series, Not From Here, 1 through 5. I thought I was done, but no, I'm going to put out a 6th volume. Going to do another one on my OBEs. So I like keeping busy. The books are a lot of work, but they're so much fun.
Has your name been in the news lately? Because I feel like I just saw somebody talking about you in a video.
Yeah, I had a few people contact me and said they saw me on the news. And I'm trying to figure out which. Well, I've done TV over the years, but none super recently. I was on the news about which was it? The Paradise Valley UFO crash in Arizona. They reached out to me because I wrote a book about Arizona and covered that case, a very famous crash retrieval case. So that might be it. But yeah, I've done a number of shows over the years, and sometimes they replay them.
I'm not the only one then that saw that. It's like a UFO sighting in a way. We saw you on the news and other people saw it too.
Yeah, it always surprises me because I never in a million years thought I'd be doing TV. And I don't do a whole lot, but yeah, I was on Ancient Aliens and the Jesse Ventura Conspiracy Show, Alien Highways, UFO Hunters, Deep Sea UFOs, sightings way back in the day, and a few other shows like that, National Geographic Explorer. It's fun.
Now that you mentioned it, I think it was Ancient Aliens because I have a Samsung TV and it comes with 500 stations or 1,000 stations, something like that. And there's an Ancient Alien channel that just plays 24 hours a day. And that's like my default channel. Like if I turn on the TV, it defaults to that show. And I think it happened to pop on and there you were. So maybe that was it.
Very cool. Yeah, they'd called me several times over the years and it never panned out until finally it did. And yeah, it was fun. They treated me really well. Flew me up to New York and got to meet Richard Dolan. And yeah, it was pretty interesting.
That's awesome. Well, what initially drew you to investigate Onboard UFO Encounters? And how does that book fit in with your broader body of work on ETs?
Well, initially I was completely skeptical of all of this stuff until I did not believe any of it. My brother came running into the house when I was 13 years old. I saw a UFO. I'm like, no, you didn't. They're not real. Stars are too far away. I don't want to hear it. That, of course, changed. And I remember the exact date, November 17, 1986. There was a very famous case which took place on that day. Captain Kenju Torochi of JAL Airlines was flying over Alaska with his crew in a commercial airliner and saw a UFO. It was a great case. They kind of just joked about it on TV. But that's what kind of opened the door for me. And I asked my brother Mark about his UFO sighting. It turned out to be really impressive. Found out I knew a lot of people in my own family, my friends, coworkers who had encounters. So that was a real shock and took me a year really to adjust to. Joined MUFON, became a field investigator, started really doubling down on this, about every book I could find. I don't know, for some reason I became obsessed. And ultimately I started writing articles, put out my first book about 10 years into my research and did a whole series of books about UFOs over various states, New York, Arizona, California, and so forth. But ultimately, I really started to focus my research on people who've had direct contact, saw humanoids, or especially taken on board. Because this, I think, is really the heart of the UFO. I don't like that word phenomena, the UFO experience. This is where almost everything we know about ETs comes from these people who have been taken on board and interacted directly with extraterrestrials. So I really started to focus mostly on that. So I find it has the most data, it's the most interesting, and yeah, the cutting edge of UFO research. So that when I started putting together Onboard UFO Encounters, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to focus on solely cases where people have been taken on board, which turned out to be a good thing because this is my most successful book, in terms of sales at least, so far. And I've got a few who are creeping up towards it, but yeah, I'm really excited about this book in particular because the cases are just amazing to me. So many people are having this kind of experience, far more than people realize. So I think it's important that people realize that this is taking place all over the world.
What is your process for sourcing and verifying these cases?
Oh, it's a process, all right. Initially, I had the really good fortune of having a lot of people I knew, I loved, trusted, knew they weren't lying, to interview. So that kind of gave me an opportunity to hone my skills as an interviewer because I knew these people weren't lying. These were people I loved and trusted. And I very quickly built a network of people. Every coworker has friends, and my friends have friends and family members. So it started to branch out very quickly to, from dozens of people to hundreds. And I got to really learn how to do fact checking, get references, really start to sort of detect when a person is telling the truth or not. There's various methods. Often, almost always, when someone describes particularly an onboard encounter, they will start with some caveat like, I don't have any history of mental illness. I've got a good job. I don't do drugs. Please don't use my name. I haven't even spoken to my wife about this, or my husband, or my family doesn't know. They'll become very emotional, and they start investigating you as much as you're kind of investigating them because they're very wary of being gaslit or not believed or ridiculed. And there's little details that I've become very familiar with. Certainly back in the late 1980s, when I started researching it, these details weren't well known. They are probably more well known now because this subject has gone mainstream. But in terms of what the interior of a UFO looks like, the attire that the ETs wear, how they communicate, the perhaps equipment or medical instruments that they use, all these little details help to confirm the veracity of a person's experience.
When you say the details, are you saying that the details are consistent from case to case?
100%. Yeah. Now, when I talk to somebody, it's pretty easy for me to predict what they're going to say if it's an authentic case, because the sequence of events follows a fairly set pattern. And yeah, the details are very consistent. For example, the interior of a UFO is almost always described as being seamless in terms of how the walls look. They might be metallic, they might be white, they might, be perhaps a pastel color, even blue or something along these lines, but almost always described as very clean, rounded walls in terms of, curved into the ceiling and curved into the floor. Another detail is indirect lighting. There are almost zero cases. I don't want to say zero, but almost no cases where someone will see a light source. It's as if the walls themselves kind of glow. Really funny to hear witnesses try to describe this, because even telepathy, the universal mode of communication is telepathy, and not everyone's familiar with that. So witnesses will start saying, I don't know how to tell you this, but they were kind of talking in my head. I'm like, oh, well, telepathy. And almost always they'll say things like, don't be afraid, no harm will come to you, have no fear. That's the first thing they always say. So I start hearing these details. The jumpsuits, they have no buttons, no zippers, no pockets, nothing like that. So there's all these details. I remember one time I was interviewing a gentleman, a Navy medic, a good witness. He saw praying mantis type ETs. And I asked him how big the craft was that he was inside. How big was the room? And he gave me this look like, how do I explain this to this guy? He's not going to believe me. I'm like, just go ahead and tell me, because I could see, you can intuitively kind of see what people are thinking. And he's like, well, when I got on board, the room was about 30 feet across. Then I asked them where they were from. And he said, I don't know if you're going to believe me or not, but this room doubled in size. It grew in size. They displayed this holographic star chart. I saw the solar system, and way off in the distance was this star, was blinking red. And they said, that's our home world. And yeah, that absolutely resonated with me, because I've talked to a number of people who go inside a UFO and it's much bigger on the inside than the outside. And the room can sometimes grow or shrink in size. That's a detail which is not well known even today. It is now, unfortunately, now that I've let it out. But yeah, those are the kind of details. And I'm still holding a few close to my chest because they are consistent. And when I hear it, I'm like, oh, okay. But usually you can tell, because a person will become very emotional. It's not at all unusual for people to tear up or even weep openly, just from the emotion of their experience. Because almost every single time, this is an experience which affects a person on multiple levels: physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychically, mentally. They're challenged on each of these levels to a degree that it's a life-changing experience. And you can see their testimony, their emotional reactions reflect that. And it's very difficult for them to talk about. And also, there's not a lot of language to describe some of the things people are seeing, because they are literally alien. They're trying to describe these instruments that they have no words for. So there's all kinds of ways you can determine the truth. I do fact checking. I've learned to ask the hard questions, like, have you done drugs? Do you have a history of mental illness? Do you have, what's your job? Which can be a factor here, because I learned that a lot of people who are having, this was so interesting to me. Because I'm like, who's having contact and why? Because it's evenly divided between men and women. Very young people, elderly people, all blood types, all ancestries. But a really interesting pattern I noticed is a person's profession. I was interviewing this lady from Norway who had an encounter. She had no history of UFO encounters. That is a pattern as well. This follows family lines. And well over 50%, probably 70%, people who are taken on board, this is something that's happened to their parents or aunts and uncles or somewhere in their family. And she didn't have that. So I asked her her profession. And she's like, well, I'm a retired artist, but please don't use my name, because right now I'm very active in human and animal rights in my area. I'm very well known. That rang a bell for me, because I just interviewed Michael Carter, Reverend Michael Carter, and worked very hard fighting against racism and this sort of thing. I'm like, oh gosh, well, John Hunter Gray, he's a social worker, award-winning. So I started looking at the professions of people I've interviewed, and a good portion of them were people who were doing good work for humanity in some capacity. Doctors, nurses, writers, musicians, entertainers, inventors, police officers. And, it can be a variety of things, and not even necessarily their profession, but several philanthropists who, are fairly well off. And so that is absolutely a pattern I noticed. And yeah, I try to fact check a person's employment. which is pretty easy to do these days. So there's all kinds of ways to learn. I've had a few people who tried to hoax me, and I kind of caught them, but that's very rare, honestly, because a person is very reluctant to reach out unless they're truly seeking help. And that's always been my primary motivation, not to get your story so I can write about it, but to help people because so many people are having these experiences.
What about the ships being living beings themselves? Is that something common that you find?
Yes. One of my first interviews was a friend. Kyle was his name, and he was driving along the 5 freeway in the Central Valley of California, and late at night with his friend, and they came upon a UFO kind of hovering there along the highway. He says, as I drove up to it, I had the distinct sense that this was not so much a craft, but a living being. And I thought, wow, is that ever interesting? Because I hadn't really heard that before. And I started to hear that sort of thing more often as time went on. And I had a lot of questions about it because people would be taken on board and they're like, well, I felt like this ship was actually alive and it would communicate with me. And I never really fully connected the dots until I talked to another contactee who you may be aware of, Dolly Saffron, who basically laid it out in black and white. She's like, oh yeah, all craft are essentially what we would call living beings, embodied, ensouled, and are partly biological, inhabited by, or how would I say, she called them fifth dimensional beings. So yeah, that absolutely, I think, is the rule with these craft. They are what we would call living beings. It just goes to show how truly advanced they are. And any efforts our own governments are making right now to, quote, reverse engineer these things are perhaps successful to a very, very limited degree, but will never, ever match the advancement of the extraterrestrials themselves, because these craft themselves are not necessarily even constructed in the third dimension. So there's a lot more to this than I think people fully understand. But yeah, absolutely, these things are living beings. And it's very interesting to hear people talking about that, because I hear it again and again.
Well, it makes sense why they would be seamless.
And it's interesting because that's another little detail I'll use to verify a person's experience, because they'll touch the walls. And it's not necessarily hard metal, as you might think of it. Some people describe it more as akin to dolphin skin. When I hear that, I'm like, wow, okay, I got a good one here.
Have you ever seen that TV show Farscape?
I don't think I have. I've heard of it.
It's an amazing, amazing show. It came out in the late 90s on the Sci-Fi Channel. And I think you can still watch it on Amazon Prime, probably. It's either that or Netflix, or at least you could. But in that show, the ship is a living being.
Does not surprise me. Probably they had some insight into what's truly going on here, because that's absolutely what people described. Particularly, if they're taken up to the control room, sat down in the seat, these craft are flown psychically. Their technology is very much what we would call consciousness or psychic based. So yeah, I'll have to check that out. No, I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah, it's like one of my all-time top favorites. When people are inside the craft and they appear to expand or get larger, do you think it's a dimensional thing, or do you think that the people are actually getting smaller, or what's going on?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because there's some indication that both of this could be happening. I would say for the most part, no, the people are remaining the same size, and the craft has its own dimension, so to speak, which is how they travel, because they have people are pulled up through this sort of light beam, and this is what makes it very difficult, I think, for people to sometimes remember, because it's in effect like being like a near-death experience almost. There's some really interesting parallels, and people will be taken into a craft and they won't even see any walls, because it's almost like it is another dimension. And this is how I think people are pulled out of the third dimension, out of time, so to speak. And they can have an hours long or longer experience and come back literally moments later. Or as there's this thing called the Oz effect. When suddenly someone is right next to a UFO or an ET, all the traffic will suddenly disappear. All the sounds stop. There's this eerie silence. And what's I think is going on here is that they have been pulled into what we might term the fourth dimension, or certainly out of the third dimension. So yeah, there's absolutely an interdimensional quality to this. I don't know that people are changing size so much, but I did a study of this because there's a number of cases. This happened to Betty Andreasson. The ETs came down and they shrunk this guy to a foot tall and pulled him into a UFO, which shrunk down itself. They called it deopulating. And I started looking into that because I knew of another case, Bert and Denise Twiggs, who would be taken on board, and sometimes they would be shorter or taller. I had people describe coming back, and they would have grown 2-3 inches, and then come back, and they're shorter or taller. I'm like, what is it? I'm trying to unpack all this because there's a number of cases of this, and I think my favorite was I asked Dolly about this, Dolly Samarin. I'm like, I don't suppose you've ever heard of people being shrunk down or anything like this. And she's like, well, actually, yeah. She probably would not have volunteered this if I hadn't asked because it's so bizarre. But she was on board once when they had pulled a gentleman on board. They took him into another room, placed him in this chamber and shone this kind of light down on him and shrunk this 6-foot tall man down to about 2.5 feet. And she was blown away, obviously. So what is going on here? And the ship, Talata, spoke to her and said, well, there's a macro universe and a micro universe. Now, there's a lot more going on here than you might be aware of. And really didn't elaborate much more than that. But she watched this little guy walk off and join other little people. And so, yeah, there's something to that. And it's really interesting. That's one of the reasons we call the book Symmetry, because there is this incredible symmetry between the macro universe and the micro universe in terms of, an atom and the ions and so forth that surround it and spin around, to solar systems, to even larger structures. So, yeah, there's something to that. ETs are very advanced when it comes to time and space. I mean, there was a case from Leonard Stringfield involving a UFO crash retrieval where the gentleman was brought on board to photograph the UFO. He photographed it from outside. It was 20, 30 feet across. Went inside, said it was as big as a gymnasium. This is a crash retrieval case. So that just goes to show how truly advanced these ETs are. It's over and over again, we hear about craft being much larger on the inside, a TARDIS, so to speak, from like Doctor Who. Yeah, very interesting to me because it just goes to show that we don't fully understand what's going on here.
Are most of the accounts coming from fully conscious recall or hypnosis?
In my books, like the Onboard UFO Encounters, it's 80% fully conscious recall. Hypnosis does work, and I support it. I think it should be used really as a last resort because it is controversial, and it has been proven that false memory syndrome does happen, especially if used incorrectly. But it's also been proven, there's an equal number of studies on both sides, that it's absolutely an accurate tool done correctly. I stayed away from it because of the controversy, so I can say without any reservations that these cases are not drawn from hypnosis. Almost every single person who's ever gone under hypnosis has some degree of fully conscious recall. They saw the UFO, they may have had missing time, but they're having flashbacks, actual memories of being on board. So it's kind of a trick question. 100%, technically speaking, of people who've been, quote, taken on board have some fully conscious recall. But I will say the vast majority do have a lot of fear, and problems with recall. And it's pretty rare that I run into someone who is what I would call a fully conscious contactee. And having interviewed a couple of hundred people extensively, and I'm definitely in terms of actually talking to people who had this experience, thousands. It's just a handful who are what I would call fully conscious contactees. One of the first people I interviewed was that way. Dolly Saffron, probably my favorite. A gentleman from Utah, Don Anderson, he had fully conscious recall. A guy from England who won't let me use his real name, I call him Gary, fully conscious. And yeah, a number of people over the years. And one gentleman, his story is in the book, Ron Chernin, had missing time for, he had 3 hours of missing time after seeing this UFO, but remembered over the next 2 weeks. So I'm going to put that in the fully conscious recall because he didn't use hypnosis. And that is not at all unusual. I hear that quite a bit, where people will have a cue or a trigger. They might see the book Communion, the cover. I can't tell you how effective that has been for waking people up, because I've heard that a dozen times. And I'm going to put that under the fully conscious encounter because, again, they're not using hypnosis. But yeah, we know hypnosis works because the events recalled through regressive hypnosis match perfectly with those that are fully conscious. But for the reasons of the controversy, I've stayed away from it. And I always tell witnesses, first thing you should do is write everything down that you remember and keep going back to it. And you can slowly fill in the details. And then meditate, do meditation. That brings it back. Do dream work. Betty and Barney Hill. Betty Hill had a series of dreams immediately following her encounter, which completely filled out all the details, and later went under regressive hypnosis. And it was the same darn thing. She remembered it fully through her dreams. Then you can perhaps go to a support group and people will start talking, and that brings back other details. But I only recommend hypnosis if someone has got a very clear-cut case of missing time and they're suffering from anxieties, perhaps, associated with their experience, and just feel this absolute dire need to know what happened. So yeah, I would say my case is no, they don't rely on hypnosis for the most part.
In your book, there's a case of two brothers whose experience led to lifelong consequences. Without spoiling too much, what made this story stand out to you?
Well, this gentleman just really touched my heart. He's from Europe, and they had an encounter together where they were taken on board, and they both remembered it. And it was very much a life-changing event for them. And he was able to process it. But his brother, sadly, had a real difficult time with it. And ultimately, it did not go well for him. But this gentleman absolutely felt like the contact was benevolent. And this is a pattern we see very often. It can be very scary for people, understandably, because we have this fear of the unknown, and suddenly you find yourself in a place that's, by definition, alien. It's incredibly difficult to process. And so he was able to work through it. His brother was not, and ultimately took his own life. And certainly, I think that was an issue or a factor here. There were other issues going on. So I'm certainly not going to blame the ETs for it. But yeah, it was very difficult for his brother. But ultimately, the gentleman I interviewed said it was a good experience for him. And it woke him up psychically to an incredible degree, where he had all kinds of premonitions and developed this incredible connection to the natural world, which is amazing. It's a question I always ask contactees now. Like, do you have any unusual animal stories? And almost always, without exception, they'll talk about how deer will walk up to them or little birds will land in their hand. He kept fish, this guy, and he woke up just in time to watch his fish give birth. And says anytime he goes to anyone's house, their pets come running up to him and jump on his lap, when they almost never do that to people, or, bark at them or what have you, or won't come out. Not with him. There's something about contactees that I think it's the telepathy, honestly, because when ETs communicate with a person telepathically, it wakes up your own ability to do this. It's a natural human ability. It's not paranormal. It's not supernatural. It's natural. And this is one of the ET goals, is to sort of wake us up to our own spirituality, our psychic ability. Yeah, that was a very touching case. He was very reluctant to be interviewed because he's on the spectrum, so to speak. I don't like labels. But there does seem to be a high incidence of what we would call that neurodivergency, which to me, in many cases, is almost a gift, because these people are extraordinarily intelligent and have a way of looking at the world that's just a little bit different from perhaps the average person.
What do you think are some of the other goals of the ETs?
Oh, I think we've got a really good handle on it. And people speculate wildly, they're kidnapping us and doing experiments and all this fear-based, honestly, nonsense speculation. I'm like, prove it. What cases do you have to support this scenario? So I stepped back, and I looked at my own research primarily to get a handle on this, and then at others who absolutely confirmed the same thing. People like Barbara Lamb and Edith Fiore and John Mack and others, quite a few. We've got a very good handle on it, I think. There's about 5 major, quote, goals or agendas. I don't like the term agenda. It's kind of negative. I'll just say goals that the ETs are trying to achieve. And one, people are taken on board. The event they're most likely to experience is a physical exam. And there's a lot of speculation about why this is taking place. But those who have been able to, not have a panic fear reaction are able to converse with the ETs and get answers. And this is essentially what's going on here. Another is to sort of guide a person in their own personal life. It's not at all unusual for ETs to tell people, assist them in what career path they want to choose, or where they're going to live, or their relationships. So there's a very personal aspect to UFO encounters, which people are often reluctant to discuss because these are very personal events for them. It's really interesting because sometimes an encounter will occur during a pivotal point in a person's life. They just had a messy divorce. They just had a child. They just lost their job or got a job or are moving somewhere. And that's when the encounter occurs. I had my own encounter on my birthday. That does turn up as well. There's just this really interesting timing to these encounters, and it's very personal. Another goal would definitely be to educate people. So they will take you down to what we would call the engine room, and they will explain to people in detail how these craft work, usually along the lines of harnessing the magnetic gravitational field lines of our planet in terms of when they travel here on Earth, or interstellar distances. They explain how they travel interdimensionally. But they will provide all this information about our use of energy and this sort of thing. I've got several cases of this, and there are a number of contactees who become really interested in quantum physics, astronomy, mathematics, these sort of things. That's very common, actually. So they're really trying to inform people. Another would be warnings. And this is very, very consistent. And it's falls into 3 main categories. This is so interesting to me because this is consistent whether it's grays or mantids or human looking or light beings or little blue dwarfs or tall whites, or all of these beings are giving the same warnings. And it began right when the modern age of UFOs started, 1947, 48, thereabouts, coinciding exactly with the atomic age, coinciding exactly at the point that we were turned onto a path towards self-destruction, polluting the entire planet, and possibly suffering an existential crisis. Suddenly, the ETs arrived in very large numbers and started pulling enormous amounts of people on board and giving this message. And the message is, one, warnings against the use of nuclear materials in any capacity, whether it's bombs or, nuclear power or anything like this. They're very concerned about it and warn people over and over again. Another is war and aggression. And they're very much concerned about how we treat ourselves, each other, and of course, this planet. They warn people about pollution and the destruction of the environment. And will actually show people future events that will take place unless we change our path. So that is very, very consistent. Another goal would be to awaken people to their own psychic abilities, as I mentioned earlier. And you will see this because almost without exception, every contactee comes away from their experience with a pronounced escalation, so to speak, of psychic ability. They will start having astral projection experiences. That happened to me. I thought it was a coincidence. No, I don't think so anymore. They will start doing mediumship or seeing shadow people or having precognition. The whole list of it turns up to, and it's clear that that is one of the goals because they tell people this. They will even say something like, "This is our gift to you for working with us." I've had 3 people been told exactly that. Another is to just let people know that we are being watched over and that ETs are real. Another is to inform people about our relationship to them, because over and over again, people will get the same message. We are you, you are us, we are one. That exact phrase has turned up over and over again. I laughed out loud when Dolly told me that. I'm like, oh, there it goes again. They just want people to know that we share a common heritage. We share a common ancestry, and that all the beings out there are not different from us. The differences we're seeing are a matter of ancestry. That's it. We all look different on this planet, and pretty much it's the same kind of differences we're seeing with what we would call extraterrestrials. So in a nutshell, that I think is their agenda. They're really just very concerned about how we treat ourselves, each other, and this planet.
What is the range of beings that your research subjects are reporting to you? Like grays, mantids, or is there something consistent over and over?
I did a statistical study of my own cases on this, and I certainly looked into it with others. And from my own files, it's 60 to 70% what we would call grays. And I hesitate to lump that all into one category because some of these guys can be 6, 7 feet tall. Others are all the way down to 3 feet. And it's not just gray. They'll have very white, pale skin or yellowish or bluish or the pink skin. So you get, some will describe very much almond-shaped eyes that wrap around, and others will describe round eyes. Some describe a larger nose, very rarely. Usually the nose is quite small and sort of a slit-like mouth with not any visible lips and no ears that protrude. Not always, though. Some will describe, little pointed ears. So you get an incredible variation just among what we would call grays. And there's certainly a category of grays which are not what we would call living beings. They're probably biological androids that are not born or die or ensouled, but are more, biological androids, I guess would be the best way to put it, and don't express a whole lot of emotion. So, because people often tell me, like, these guys had no emotion. And then they're taken on board and they do meet someone who gives them incredible love. People have described over and over again the same phrase. It was a love I've never felt before. Because they do have this incredible ability of compassion and love to a degree that we rarely have here on this planet. People describe it as being like the first time I met my wife, or when we got married, or the first time I held my child. So yeah, grays largely. Second would probably be just humans. looking. People call them Nordics. I reject that term because it's misleading. The gentleman I interviewed described he's a Native American. He had a craft land in front of him, and out stepped a gentleman who he said looked Middle Eastern to him, very dark skin, extremely handsome, quite tall and muscular. So that's a typical description of what we would call a human-looking ET. They're usually described as being very beautiful, very well built, and perhaps a little bit taller than us, but not always. Another gentleman I interviewed had an encounter on the beach in Rio Carrillo, Southern California, and saw 7 of these human-looking ETs, men and women, all looked very much like brothers and sisters, or almost like twins. That is often described. But he said they looked Mesoamerican to him, Peruvian or Mexican, all about 5 feet tall, short hair, very nice looking, very, muscular. So yeah, human looking is probably the second most common category I hear, and I think that's reflected in most people's research. Praying mantis does come up. It's not super common, but it's fairly consistent. Usually described as anywhere from 6 feet tall to, even 15 feet. I've got 2 outlying cases, 15-foot tall praying mantis beings, who again are humanoid, human essentially, share the same genetics, but just with we paradolize everything. Pareidolia. We kind of they look like praying mantis, but they're really not. They're humanoid. But that's what we call them, and yeah, that turns up quite a bit. Short little blue beings. My sister-in-law saw those. She's an artist. She drew a very detailed illustration of what she saw, which I posted, and I get regularly contacted from people who's like, "Oh my God, where did you get that drawing? That's exactly what I saw." If you recall Whitley Strieber's movie Communion, there's a scene in there where these little troll-like blue beings are featured. It looks very much like that. Funny, the guy I interviewed in Utah, Don Anderson, saw those as a child over and over again. And yeah, another gentleman from Texas saw that picture. He's like, "Oh my God, it's exactly what I saw." So that's another sort of a variation of a gray, honestly, I think. But strange humanoids of all kinds. There's a catch-all category. It's not at all unusual for people to describe a 9-foot tall, 8 to 9 foot tall humanoid with just human looking, but different. Tall whites, that's another category that comes up, which the term is kind of used interchangeably. So there's short little humanoids of all kinds. There was a study done that I think it was 70% of extraterrestrials reported by people are 4 feet tall, thereabouts, 4 to 3 feet tall. But the variation is almost endless. It's very difficult to categorize.
I wouldn't classify myself as a researcher, but more and more of my experiencer guests are claiming to encounter mantis beings. And it seems that most of the time, these beings are the ones in charge. Does that make any sense to you?
I think a lot of people have gotten that impression. What I do know about the mantis in terms of coming from contactee angle, what the contactees have learned is that is a very old race. I don't want to use that term, but a very old ancestry, for lack of a better word, and very intelligent. And I'm not sure I would say that they're in charge, because what I've seen is that these guys have no federalized system. There's no what we would call presidents or kings or queens or no galactic federation, as far as I can tell. I don't have any good reporting on that. I know that turns up in a few cases here and there. I question it, because what I think we're looking at is a wide variety of ET types, I'll use that term, who work in cooperation with each other. Mm-hmm. And more often than not, people will describe grays, human-looking, and a mantis or more working together. And the mantis people are sometimes termed the watchers because they've got this goal of really just recording everything and learning as much as they can. They're very, very intelligent. A gentleman, the Navy medic I mentioned, he met 15-foot tall praying mantis beings. They gave him all the warnings I discussed about. They told him that they can speak all the languages of our planet. They're very easy to learn. They've been watching humanity for a very, very long time. So, yeah, the praying mantis to me are one of the more interesting types because people do describe that as them being very intelligent. And there may be someone who's sort of directing things, so to speak. That's the role that they're taking during a person's onboard experience, because they all are basically have their functions that they're trying to achieve, if that makes sense.
Right. And I should have clarified my statement because I really meant in terms of the beings on the ship. Like there may be mantis and grays, and the mantis appears to be the one in charge. But I found it fascinating that your thinking or your research shows that there isn't a galactic federation, because so many people comment that there is.
That never came up in my own research. And there was one guy who asked about it, and the ETs told him, well, you could call it that. It's not accurate, but we do work together. Now, the ET Society is something we're still trying to unpack. I was really glad I met Dolly Saffron because she does work very closely with them. And she's made it very clear that, no, there's nothing like this. There's no Council of Nine or any of this. And I know there are differing opinions on this. I am wary of it because there's a lot of disinformation in this field, and there's a lot of hoaxing. There's a lot of people who are just seeking attention, perhaps. And I'm certainly not going to gaslight a witness. If this is your experience, that is your experience. But from what I've been able to tell, no, they don't have any government as we would think of it, no organized religion, certainly no money, nothing like how our society is organized. It's much more cooperative. And yeah, I'm sure there are factions who have different goals they're pursuing, because you can label ETs any way you want. Some are clearly tourists just coming to check out. Some are scientists. Some are working very closely with humanity to uplift us, so to speak, or study, or do what they can to help. And I think this leads to different interpretations. We have a tendency to view things through the lens of our own belief system. And we can see this going back throughout history where people are like, well, could these be angels? Are they demonic? They're not demonic. I studied that, by the way. That is a theory that's still floating around, and I do not subscribe to it for a number of reasons that I can go down if you want. But I think that's one of the issues here, is we have our own system of government and the way we do things, and we kind of overlay, it's inevitable. We overlay our own belief systems onto our experience and try to interpret it in a way that we can understand. And I think it's really hard to conceive of a society that's so openly telepathic that they don't operate the way we do. And it's a complete cooperative, and everyone is aware of what everyone else is doing, and they all have their roles. They operate as individuals just like we do. But I don't think there's any need for, there's no prisons or anything like that. So it's still a lot of unanswered questions, I think, about exactly how ETs live their daily lives. I'm putting together a sequel to the book Symmetry about Dolly Saffron, where we're going to unpack that a little bit more, because people do get some really interesting information about that. But most, no. We're still at a very early stage of research here and trying to figure out what's going on with life beyond Earth.
What about Hayam Ashed, the former Israeli general that talked about the Galactic Federation? Do you think that's misinformation?
I can only express my own opinion. Yes. I do, honestly. Not to say that he's not a genuine, sincere, honest person who may have been, misled perhaps. And I hate to, comment on that because, again, I don't want to gaslight anybody. But I just don't find the evidence for that compelling enough to say that this is something that does exist. And I think we have to be very, very careful about, what we know about this subject. And, again, people might have a different opinion and their research might show this, but mine doesn't. And I'm going to stick to that because this is something I really had to do as a researcher. I was so naive getting involved in this subject. I had no idea there was a cover-up. It never even occurred to me that our governments would be lying to us. And they are. That's demonstrably true. So any information coming from our governments about who these ETs are and why they're here, I don't trust them one iota because they have never told the truth and are still not telling the truth. All these recent government disclosures are not disclosure whatsoever. And you can even go out of the UFO field and look at the actions of our own governments and see how nefarious they have been to humanity at large. So, and I don't mean to be doom and gloomy or pessimistic, but I am just very wary of what's coming out of intelligence circles because I don't find it the least bit credible. Everything we know that we can truly trust about ETs is coming from one source, and that's the contactees. That's who I trust. And I really had to step back and I'm just going to do my own research here because the fear-based, lurid stories that were being presented by the media were scaring the pants off of me. I'm like, is this true? And no, I don't think it is. I think there are bad actors out there within the UFO field who are not. They call themselves researchers, but they're not. They are agents. And I don't want to name names because some of them are very active in this field. But we know some of them absolutely worked for the government, those who have passed on, like Phil Klass or Donald Menzel, were knowingly misleading people. And there are absolutely some people who are still in the UFO field who are spreading disinformation and fear and lies. It's really unfortunate. It's one of the reasons I do my research. I try to be very objective and fact-based. And I get pushback from people who say, oh, you're Pollyanna. You're all puppies and rainbows when it comes to UFOs. I'm like, no, I am not. Look at the cases I'm presenting. Read my books. I do not interpret a person's experience. I work very hard to present it as accurately. When I publish a book, I will send them the chapter and make sure that they can fact check it themselves. And usually they'll say something like, oh, well, this part is inaccurate or this event happened before that one. A few minor corrections. But I generally, in my books, will quote witnesses extensively and let them tell their own story. So I think it's up to all of us to do our own research. Don't believe me when I tell you about the sequence of events that take place. Do your own research, and you will see that this is what people are absolutely experiencing. All I can say is that, yes, it's very scary for some people, but ultimately the vast majority of people I've interviewed, and upwards of 80%, are very thankful to have had contact and said they wouldn't trade it for anything. And that was a mixed bag in the beginning. But ultimately, only 5 witnesses have said, oh, I hated it. It was evil. I didn't like it at all. I wish it would end. And one couple I interviewed, they had an encounter not too long ago and basically told the ETs to go away. We don't ever want to see you again. And they did. They ended their contacts. So there's a lot going on, and there's a whole bell curve of how people can interpret their experience or react to it. But ultimately, I think ETs have an agenda, as I said earlier, of guiding, teaching, warning, informing, this sort of thing.
It's not uncommon for me to see in the comments of a video that aliens are demons. Can you express more about how that's not true?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it up because this is probably the third or fourth most popular quote hypothesis for ET origins. Oh, they're fallen angels. Because, 1/3 of the angels has fallen. I'm like, well, 2/3 didn't fall. So how wouldn't it be much more likely they're angelic? That's my first argument here. Uh, and by their fruits you shall know them. That's another religious phrase. This is, basically faith-based thinking, and it's not fact-based thinking. So that's why I kind of stepped back. I'm like, let's look at what we actually know. I did my own research into hauntings and demonic spirits. I read everything I could find, and I interviewed people who had demonic hauntings. A demonic haunting basically follows a very set pattern and manifests in a completely different way than a UFO encounter. Almost always starts with someone opening a door in some way, perhaps the use of drugs or evil acts or messing around with a Ouija board or something along those lines. And it will start with knockings and doors opening and closing and basic haunting manifestations, cold spots, bad odors. That's called infestation. And then it moves to oppression, usually focusing on one witness in a household, perhaps the most vulnerable one, who's the one who used the Ouija board or the drugs or what have you. And the activity will focus on them to the exclusion of others. So everyone thinks this person is going crazy. The ultimate goal is possession and destruction of this witness, to really just wreak havoc. It's all very evil and about negativity and hatred of God, and ultimately leads to this sort of possession attempt. And I've talked to people who've gone all the way to the end, where they were physically attacked by these dark spirits. There's quite a bit of controversy about what demons even are. Because if you go way back into the religious writings, there are non-human spirits who are fallen angels. But if you go up to current writings, like Ed and Lorraine Warren, these are people, humans, who've chosen the path of evil. So there's a little bit of bleed through as to who exactly these entities are. But are they extraterrestrials? Don't think so. It's a completely different pattern of manifestation. Because when someone is first of all, this is a spiritual experience. Do they need UFOs to fly? No. Why would they? They are an interdimensional being that has been around forever. Extraterrestrials are interdimensional as well. So are we. All entities are interdimensional. Demonic beings are not physical, though they can manifest physically. Extraterrestrials are people like us. And the extraterrestrial experience is one which has got a goal of helping people. It's a completely different phenomena. And I just would ask people to really step back from what you believe to be true to what you know to be true. Because there's a big chasm between belief and knowledge. And certainly there's truth in the Bible and wonderful things you can learn from it. And religion has its place. I've interviewed a lot of people who were devoutly religious and wondered if they were having a demonic attack. And after we unpacked it, by and large, most of them will move away from structured, fundamental religion. Not all of them, but that's a pattern I do see quite often. And if I may, just one other theory that's very common is this kind of alien intelligence that wears different masks. That's the second most popular theory put forth by Jacques Vallée, John Keel, and a number of other prominent researchers. And it gets under my skin. I don't subscribe to it because it's needlessly complicated. It's very anthropocentric, and it's not supported by the data. Jacques Vallée, love him. He's a fantastic researcher and a true asset to this field. But his 5 reasons that ETs are not ETs are absurd. And I'm just going to hardline this because I am concerned about people subscribing to this theory, which is not supported by the evidence. His 5 reasons are, in effect, ETs, the chances of ETs appearing to be humanoid would be infinitesimal, very unlikely. Well, how can you say that if we don't know what ETs look like? And the fact is we do, because there are countless reports of them looking humanoid. So there's far too many cases for them to be conducting a study. It makes no sense. I'm like, well, how can you say that? That's entirely speculative. He says, ET encounters are too bizarre. They're sometimes symbolic. What? It's too bizarre? How? That makes no sense. I mean, you can go down the whole list, and it fails to, real quick, fails to explain where people are when they're being taken, because they're missing from their rooms. It fails to explain ET implants that are found in people's bodies. These are physical things. We know this is a physical experience. It fails to explain how a craft, metallic, can manifest out of nothing. It fails to explain the landing traces, the radar return cases, the missing pregnancies, the fact that people will be taken on board and see their hybrid child, and their hybrid, teenager, then their hybrid adult. Fails to explain the reverse engineering of ET craft and the many cases of, crash retrievals and ET bodies. I've got a lot more to say about this, but I had to throw that in there. I'm sorry, because I subscribe to the idea that these are extraterrestrials. Having had my own experience, having interviewed hundreds of people, I can tell you that those researchers who focus on that have come to that same conclusion. John Mack, Bud Hopkins, Edith Fiore, David Jacobs, Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith, and the vast majority of contactees as well. So no, we're dealing with extraterrestrials, not demons, not some weird intelligence, not time travelers from the future, nothing like that.
You spoke about the Ouija board. Do you really believe that that can be something that is dangerous? And if so, why do they even sell it at places, well, it used to exist, like Toys R Us?
Yeah. Well, let's face it, it's just a board. In and of itself, there's nothing wrong with it. And if you look into the history of it, it goes way back. People have been doing this for a very long time. And I've done it myself. I went to a physical medium and did what they call table lifting, which is essentially the same thing, and a Ouija board. And I think done correctly with attitude of love and light and doing white light meditations and all these procedures, it can be done safely. But I can't tell you how many cases I've had of hauntings which began that way with the indiscriminate use of a Ouija board. So I'm very wary about it because it's very difficult, I think. It's a very easy way to access the paranormal and sort of open a door to what we would call the other side. And if you know anything about astral projection and this sort of thing, there is an other side, and a lot of earthbound spirits who basically cross over and don't make it to the higher levels of the astral planes. And these are not good people often. Some are, and are simply just trapped by perhaps greed or lust or depression or anger or all the what we would call the quote deadly sins. But some are downright murderers. They're not good people. Have chosen a path of evil, and they're right there. They're right close to us, and you're more likely than not to contact one of those, and they will lie to you. They will tell you whatever you want to hear. So I would be very wary of using a Ouija board unless you absolutely know what you're doing. And it's just a tool. All psychics will tell you this. There's different tools you can use, from throwing chicken bones to tea leaf reading or tarot, all just tools. Absolutely, it's us who is doing this. So you don't need a Ouija board to communicate with spirits. Most mediums would never use a Ouija board. They've learned how to do it without the use of tools. That's all it is. It's just a tool.
Do you think you've been guided by ETs to do the work that you're doing?
Yeah. I absolutely do. My brother had a very close encounter. He had an implant in his arm. I thought it was just a sighting. Now I'm wondering about it. My little sister had a very close-up sighting, and I've come to realize, if a craft gets in a few hundred feet of you, it's probably deeper levels of contact. She had a missing time incident as well. I certainly did. I grew up skeptical and never really had anything going on. But looking in hindsight, it's a great tool because I did have a missing time incident as a child, and I had one as an adult, and I started having a lot of sightings. And over the years, I came to realize, oh gosh, I guess I'm a contactee. That was a long pathway towards realizing that. I knew from age 9 that I was going to be a writer. I knew it in my heart. I knew I was going to be telling amazing stories. And that is so interesting to me because I can't tell you how many contactees I've talked to who said, oh, from age 9, I was an astronomer. I knew I wanted to be a nurse. I knew I was going to do quantum physics or something along these lines. I'm like, gosh, that kind of happened to me. And, I have some memories of being on board. And yeah, I think I was basically asked, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, this is what I would like to do. I want to help inform the world about two things, mainly the extraterrestrial presence on our planet and the fact of life after death and our own abilities to connect to the other side. So yeah, I absolutely do think there was guidance there, and I've seen it happen in the weirdest ways because these incredible synchronicities will happen where I'm put in a position to meet somebody that I would never have met otherwise. For example, real quick, I was going to see Stephen Greer come and speak in LA, but he wanted to charge, I think, $300. I'm like, I can't, I'm a young man, I'm living check to check. I can't afford this. And the newspaper called me up and said, we have no idea why we're doing this, but we'd like to pay your way. He said it 3 times. It's like, I can't believe I'm paying for your way, but I feel compelled to do it. And that ended up being a real pivotal moment because I had several sightings right after that, met several people which had a huge influence on my life, really helped me to shift into a major UFO investigation of a wave of sightings over Topanga Canyon, which became a book. I mean, if I hadn't gone to that lecture, I think I would have had a much longer pathway towards where I am now. But over and over again, that happens.
Well, do you think that your research has opened you up in a way that now you started having OBEs?
Yes, I do. I looked into this too because I started surveying other researchers, and it was amazing how many of them started having contact after they started doing research. And when I started doing research, OBEs came right at the same time. And I always thought that was kind of a coincidence, synchronistic. Now I'm thinking it's intentional. And it's funny because my family was having a real hard time, some of them, half, I would say, with me researching UFOs. And then I'm like, guess what? I'm going out of body. I'm like, oh no, Preston's lost his mind. What's wrong with you? My dad was not happy. Uh, but, this was something that was happening. And going out of body was absolutely the most transformative experience of my entire life. I can't tell you how wonderful it turned out to be. And it's absolutely connected. I hear this from so many contactees. There was one gentleman who had a very close-up UFO sighting, landed his airplane. He was in an airplane and was approached by government men in black folks who asked him all about his sighting and then asked him, have you had any out-of-body experiences since your sighting? It was a question which really surprised him because yes, he had. This is something that does happen to contactees. And again, it's part of the ET's goal, waking people up to their own abilities. And that absolutely happened to me because that became a huge part of my life and the most precious and important part of my life. I love it so much. I cannot emphasize how much I love astral projection, and that's why I teach it to people. I've got a little guide I put together. I worked very hard to wake people up to the idea of astral projection.
How does it work for you? I mean, is it at will or spontaneous?
It's more at the at will side. I can't just snap my fingers and go out of body by any means. But for me, it kind of all unfolded at the same time. Really, the real precursor to it was my mom passing away in 1984. I became involved in research in UFOs in 1986. But 2 years earlier, my mom passed away suddenly. And it was, of course, as you can imagine, incredibly tragic. I was 19 years old. But I saw her ghost, her spirit, a couple of weeks later at the service, a full color apparition. And not believing in ghosts, I thought, I've lost my mind. I'm hallucinating. In hindsight, I realize now that was her. Did not think so at the time, but started dreaming about her, about a year later, right at the time I'm starting to get interested in UFOs. She's coming into my room at night, and I'm thinking I'm awake because she's, opens the door and I wake up. I thought I was awake. And she's telling me, she's fine telepathically. Like, don't worry, I am okay. Because I was truly devastated. I was going to bed crying. I was waking up crying. I had a real hard time with it. 'Cause we were very, very close. I think all of us kids were, but I was having these very lucid dreams. I realize now of her, and I came to a crossroads. I'm like, well, either I'm going crazy or this is really her. Not believing in life after death. I'm like, gosh, I'm going crazy. But meeting her and feeling the quality of her presence, I knew it was her, and I couldn't walk away from that. So I thought, I need to research this. Bought every book on dreams I could find, threw half of them away. They were nonsense. I ended up writing down every dream I've ever had and interviewing every person I could find about all their dreams. So I became somewhat of an expert on dreams and really started to unpack that until I finally stumbled upon Robert Monroe's book. God bless that man. Robert Monroe, of course, wrote Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and The Ultimate Journey. And it's kind of really the one who popularized this subject, certainly in the United States, with his own out-of-body experiences. I read this book, I'm like, wow. He was clearly sincere, very honest, and was having these amazing experiences, which he proved in a laboratory setting. I mean, there's no doubt this guy is for real, and gave kind of brief instructions on how to do it towards the end of the book. I'm like, wow, I mean, anyone can do this. So I thought, you know what? Let's give this a try. I'm not sure I believe it. It sounds honestly really scary to me. But if he can do it, and he says anyone can do it, why not? And so I started meditating and doing, visualizations and affirmations, essentially. And did this for about a month and a half. Almost immediately, my dream recall doubled and then quadrupled. I started having very powerful false awakenings and pre-lucid dreams. But a month and a half into this, or, let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, I lay down one afternoon on my bed, on my stomach, and felt what we call the vibratory state, which is a buzzing feeling. Robert Monroe says, you'll feel a mild electric shock. I'm like, mild? I was being electrocuted. I thought for sure that I had stuck my finger in the light socket next to my bed, and I was about to die because I was being electrocuted. And I'm flopping around there like a dying fish, scared out of my mind, when I hear this pop, and I'm flung across my room, across the hallway and into the bathroom. And I stand up and I grab the counter and I'm looking in the mirror and there's nobody there. I'm like, oh my God, I'm out of body. He's right. There is life after death. You can exist. I mean, in 1 second, I knew this was real. There was no doubt in my mind because I was out of my body. And I became incredibly emotional about it and got instantly pulled right back in. Did the same thing the next weekend. I'm like, wow, mind you, I'm in college, I'm working, I'm living at home. I am a busy guy, so I can only do this on weekends. I'm trying to become a writer. So this was a very difficult time for me, adjusting to UFOs and all of this stuff. Now I'm popping out of body. This is an added complication. That's surely good news. Third time, I woke up in the middle of the night, standing next to my bed. I had vertigo really bad. This is a sign I've learned. I'm trying to orient myself, and finally I clear my head and I look down. My body is lying in bed under the covers, and I got this dread, fear swept over me. I'm like, oh my God, I'm dead. What have I done? I should never have done this. I am dead. And I felt so bad. I was so scared. And I dove right back into my body. And it's a really interesting feeling because I'm like fitting into it. Like I'm trying to fit into a suit of armor or something. I'm sticking my hands up my arms, settling my head into my head and my feet, and then snap, I'm in my body. And I sat up in bed. I'm like, what just happened? I almost forgot it. I came that close to forgetting it. Then I remembered. I'm like, oh, I did it again. And my mood shifted 180 degrees, and I was so excited. And from that point, I never looked back. Every weekend, I would do this successfully. Pop out, I'd be out 3 seconds. I'd be, yeah, I did it. Whoosh, right back in. It's called the emotional body because your emotions are so strong. And it took me a year to learn to just relax enough where I could stay out for more than a few seconds.
Do you think a lot of contact is made with people from ETs through dreams?
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely one method of contact. Uh, but you have to be tricky how you interpret that, I think, because a lot of people will say have a dream about ET contact. And what that essentially is a memory of an actual prior event. And other times it might be telepathic contact or an actual dream communication that's going on. For the most part, I don't think people are being taken out of body on board a craft. That does happen. But I'd say for the majority of cases, people are being physically contacted. But I did go out of body once and I saw a gray. That was much later into my astral journeys.
So
But it
you're
did happen.
so you're saying that if people dream of ETs, it's most likely not their imagination?
It depends. The vast majority of dreams that people have are a reflection of their fears and desires. So if you are suddenly having contact, you might have some dreams about it that are just dreams. But you might have an actual encounter that night and remember it as a dream. Or you might have a dream that basically brings back your memory of a prior encounter. So there's kind of 3 or 4 different things going on here. A dream about UFOs doesn't necessarily mean that you were contacted that night, but it certainly could. So I think you have to be really careful in how it's interpreted because it can come, there can be a number of different explanations for what's going on. But yeah, I would say a lot of people who do, like, gosh, I had this dream last night. I was on board a craft, were physically on board a craft, but remembered it as a dream.
Since you've been out of body, do you think it's possible that the ETs could clone your body and move your consciousness into another one?
No, I have no good reporting on that from any UFO case I've ever investigated. So I'm going to just give a flat out no to that. I know there are people who've gone on board and seen what amounts to a twin of them, and I think that's exactly what it is. Because there's this weird twin connection with contactees. I can't tell you how many I've interviewed are like, I'm an identical twin. I'm like, oh, really? That's interesting. And like Dolly Saffron, she's a twin. Her twin is living with the ETs. I know of a number of cases of that. So I think that might be what's going on with some of the reports of cloning. But I don't think that's how ETs reproduce by any means. No, and I don't think that I've never heard of that. I've had no experiences of that.
I recently had a guest from China. He was on with a translator, and he claimed he was abducted and taken to a planet. I think it's called Goka or something, from what I remember. Anyways, he said the commerce on that planet is cloning beings from all over the galaxy. And not only could they clone you, but they could also download your entire consciousness or memories and create the clone of you with the memories. So it's like they cloned him and he was standing there talking to himself.
Wow. It's hard for me to comment on that because I don't know the guy and I've never heard the case. I mean, it's certainly interesting, but I have not had any personally cases of that sort of thing. But sounds intriguing.
Well, if people want to find out more about your book, do they go to a website or Amazon?
Yeah, either. It's called Onboard UFO Encounters, and I do have a website. If you just punch in my name, it should take you there, where I have all my books, including that one, with a big excerpt, so you can read a good portion of it, and certainly click on the link, which will take you to Amazon, which is the best place to purchase it. But you can get it through bookstores and other online retailers as well. But yeah, I'm a selling book
That's great.
at this point, so it seems to have really resonated with readers. I think because so many people are having this kind of experience, and this is an idea whose time has come. People are waking up to the extraterrestrial presence, and it's about time.
What's the name of your YouTube channel?
UFOs and the Paranormal with Preston Dennett.
All right.
Again, really easy to find by just writing, typing in my name on YouTube. And having a really good time with that. My channel is growing pretty quickly right now.
That's great.
So I'm super grateful and just having a really good time with it.
How often are you posting videos there?
Once a week. Yeah, I release a new video every Friday at 9 p.m. sharp. And it's an enormous amount of work. But since I'm having fun, I can't call it work.
Yeah.
But I just feel this subject is so important. We all deserve to know the truth. This is something I've worked so hard at. And I'm really very encouraged to see that this subject is going to the mainstream now, and that we're moving past the skepticism and gaslighting and ridicule, and the cover-up is starting to collapse under the weight of its own lies. Can't go on forever. Truth is indestructible. So I'm absolutely encouraged that people are waking up.
Preston, before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Yes, I'm so glad that you offered me this opportunity. Please try astral projection. This will remove your fear of death. Fear of death is a guiding force in people's life. Fear is. So move past fear. The universe is safe. We are immortal, eternal beings in a pretty much infinite universe. We have all the power of the universe within us. The only thing we take with us is love and wisdom. So really focus on that. I think that's the message most near-death experiencers get as well, certainly contactees. So allow love and truth to guide your actions, and I think everything will fall into place.
Preston, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest again.
An honor and a delight. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.